Welcome to the Savvy Working Mom podcast. This is the place where we share strategies to help you create a life you love. I'm your host, Whitney, a real-life working mom in the tech industry, professional speaker, and coach. I'm going to help you figure out how to work and mom in a way that brings you joy by using simple systems and through interviews with other working moms who are making it work. Remember that with intentional and daily action, you can live your best days now and forever. Brittany Hodak is the award-winning CEO of Creating Superfans, a company dedicated to improving customer experience. She travels often, delivering keynotes across the globe to organizations including American Express and the United Nations. She is also an author, having published the amazing Creating Superfans book, which shares innovative and proven ways to deliver a better customer experience. In addition to all this, she is mama to two boys, ages 3.5 and 6. Brittany, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here on the Savvy Working Mom podcast.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I really just want to dive into talking about travel with you because it's not often that I meet another woman, especially another mama to kids who are so young, like yours are 3.5 and 6, mine are 3 and 5 right now, who's on the road a lot, right? I know you did 59 speaking engagements in this past year. And so you yourself are really just traveling an insane amount like I used to. But before we do that, we're going to talk about travel and how do you handle work travel when you have little kids. I'd love for you, Brittany, to just share a little bit more about your career and your family.
Yeah, well, I love to travel, but it is so hard when you've got little ones. And I kind of became a keynote speaker by accident. I ran an entertainment agency for several years. It wasn't until I started having people request that I speak that I even knew keynote speaking was a career and an option at all. And for the first couple of years of my oldest son's life, I was running my agency and speaking and, growing our family and taking care of my little guy. And that just became way too much. So a few years ago, I sold the equity in the business that I had started so that I could just speak. And so now speaking and writing, even though it is a lot, it feels more manageable than what it was even just a few years ago when I had another company that I was running and sort of speaking on the side. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my husband and our 2 little boys, thankfully not too far from the airport. And Nashville's like a pretty good airport city. We can get to most places in one flight. Certainly not everywhere, but it's not as hard as if I was living somewhere where everything was a connecting flight.
I think that's one of the very important things to think about when you travel a lot is your airport. How far are you from the airport and what direct flights are coming in and out of there? Such a great point.
Yeah, because it really does make a difference, especially when you're traveling with kids. Like I did, like I said, nearly 60 trips last year, and my husband and sons came with me on probably 4 of them, 4 or 5, something like that. And that is always a consideration is like, if it is not a direct flight, we are not turning it into a family trip.
Yeah, connecting is such a problem when you have little kids. I think we should talk about what that is like and any tips or tricks that you have for traveling with little kids. But before we do that, I do want to shout out your airport. I love flying in and out of Nashville Airport because there's so much live music going on inside the airport, like at the gates, at the restaurants. It's unlike any airport I've ever been to in that way.
It is. It's a lot of fun. And we recently had a huge renovation that they were working on for years. And it's even better. So if you haven't been to the airport in the past few months, you're going to be very pleasantly surprised the next time you come. We have T gates now, like there's a whole new concourse area and even more live music, even more great stuff to give you a little bit of a flavor of our city.
Awesome. So let's talk about traveling with your kids. What are your tips, tricks, hacks, your completely like, I will not ever do this or I will always do that ideas that you can share with us?
I think one is having realistic expectations of at the end of the day, like knowing what is and is not possible based on the age of your kids. So sort of planning for, like for instance, last year, we almost did a family trip to the West Coast. I was speaking in LA. We were like, oh, we could go to Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm or do something else. And my husband and I were like, you know what? He's 2.5. We're not going to do a 4-hour flight with a 2.5-year-old. We could, but it will suck. So we would rather not do it. And, maybe we'll take them to Disney World where we can get to in like an hour and a half. So I think one is just kind of expectations and then being overly prepared. So I am the mom who has every snack that they could possibly want, every drink, movies loaded up on the iPads, everything creative so that they've got, markers and paper and stickers and any kind of little like puzzle thing that they can do. I always try to have a new thing that my kids haven't seen yet for the trip so that I know I can bust that out. And you're going to get that, that look in their eyes where it's like, oh, it's something new that they haven't seen. Even if it's just one of those, like, whatever the take and play or pack and take or whatever the little foil packages are that have like a marker and a couple of stickers and some coloring pages, like grabbing a couple of those that they haven't seen yet, grabbing a couple of the things with the like invisible marker that makes things multicolor, just something that is new to them that I know is going to buy me like 10 or 15 minutes in a pinch if I need it, because they're both, melting down.
Yes, I think that's such a great tip. My favorite go-to for that is actually we get them a new Hot Wheels.
Perfect.
They've come to start to expect it, which is a bit of a problem. But for a while there, it was very surprising to them, right? They'd open up their little book bags and there'd be a new Hot Wheels in there. And that would take them at least a good hour into the flight of like new amusement and joy.
Yeah, and that's amazing. Just like being prepared with something that they haven't seen yet.
So let's talk a little bit then about when you're traveling without your kids. How do you prepare for that? What is that like for you? Can you talk on it?
I try to never be gone for more than 3 bedtimes. Like 3 nights is what I try to never do. And there were a couple of times this year I was gone for 4 nights. So I think the way that I prepare them ahead of time depends on how long I'm going to be gone. But I always try to make it fun. There's an author and speaker named John Acuff who lives here in Franklin. We're actually like almost neighbors. And I followed him before I knew him personally. And one of the things that he has talked about in his books and on his podcast is that for years when he was traveling as a keynote speaker, he accidentally made his girls dread it and think it was bad because he would like apologize for it and be like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this. I'm so sorry. I hate it. And so they saw it as like, oh, it sucks that dad is leaving. And he tried to flip that and make it like, no, it's so exciting that dad gets to go do this. Like, it's so cool that I get to go do this. So I heard him talk about that when I think my son was probably like 3 and my little one was a newborn. And I was like, that's a really great point. So I always try to frame it not as like, oh, I'm so sorry, mommy has to go be away, but like, oh, it's so exciting that mom's going to go to Texas. Let's talk about Texas. Or I'm going to Arizona. I'll be in the desert. Let's talk about how the desert is different from here. And so my kids are excited to like look on a map and see where I'm going. And I've definitely fallen into the trap. One of the things that I'm trying to get better at is like not always bringing a souvenir, because it got to the point that they expected it. And it wasn't even like, oh, we're so happy mom's home. It was like, mom, what did you bring me? So I've been in the process of, not doing that anymore. But there are certain places where, for instance, if I'm traveling to like Arizona or Texas, my kids will be like, can you get me a scorpion lollipop? Some of the things that they think about. Like I was in Washington, D.C. and my son was like, Mom, do you think that they would have anything with a picture of the Lincoln Memorial on it? Like, could you bring me something with Abraham Lincoln or the Lincoln Memorial? So it's really cool that even if my kids aren't with me, they are getting to associate things that exist in different parts of the country with these places that I'm going, and they're excited that I'm going to visit and coming back.
Someone had told me about this early on, but I still had that like mom guilt, and I do want to talk a little bit of if you have guilt or not when you travel, but I had a little bit of guilt about not bringing them anything, so I just used to grab them the snacks from the Delta snack cart and be like, Mommy brought you cookies, and just give them like these very kind of small, easily repetitive like things that they could consume instead of bringing them toys. But now, to your point, they're always expecting the cookies or a special bag of gummies or something like that, which is, I don't know. This is something we're working through.
Yeah, it's funny. I fly Southwest and American primarily because those are the 2 best options out of Nashville. And so I would do the same thing, like bring home the little cookies, bring home the little, on Southwest, it's like a Chex Mix type, their stuff. And I would always say like, oh, I've got airplane snacks. And they were so excited to have the airplane snacks. And they would like play airplane and pretend they were flying. And pretty soon it got to the point where I was like, okay, there's like 12 bags of, Southwest Chex Mix airplane snacks in the cover. It's like not novel anymore. They're over it. They're like, we don't want to eat this like gross Chex Mix. Just give us our pirate's booty.
Yeah, they're like, where's my scorpion lollipop?
Exactly.
When it comes to preparing your kids for your travel, I love this idea of talking to them positively about it, so the feelings that they associate with it are positive. How soon do you start talking to them about it? When do you start kind of preparing them for the idea that mommy's taking a trip?
It depends on how long it has been since I traveled and how long it's going to be. There were a few times this past year where it was really hard because I had like 7 or 8 trips in a month. And, they were like in tears when I had to say like, mommy's got to leave again. And then there were times where I would go 2 weeks without having to travel. And so it wasn't a big deal for me to say that I was leaving. Typically, I'll tell them like the day before or the night before. So as we're getting closer to bedtime, saying like, hey, just wanted to let you know, mommy's not going to be here for bedtime tomorrow night. So let's read 2 books tonight. And then, read 2 books instead of one, or 4 books instead of two, or, whatever it is, and talk about where I'm going. And then I'll remind them that morning, if I'm going to like leave after they go to school, I try to make it a special morning, go with my husband, who usually is the one who does the drop offs in the morning, like go with them to school, give them the extra hugs and kisses and say like, remember, I'm not going to be home until tomorrow night, but tomorrow night I'll be home and I'll tell you all about, Montana. And in the meantime, be sure to FaceTime me for bedtime tonight, and then we'll talk again tomorrow before you leave to school. So I always try to let them know not only when they're going to see me again, but when we're going to like FaceTime.
So that's really great. We do something totally different. So I'm traveling. I try and let them know almost a week in advance, or even further. We have a family calendar that we look at every morning. It's like a written calendar, and we look at it every morning during breakfast, during the school week, not on the weekend. And I write my trips out on the weekend so that they can see when the trips are coming up. And that's been really helpful for especially my youngest. When I was telling him the day before, it was like too much of a shock. He needed more time to adjust to it. I love always hearing how different things work for different families, because all of our kids are really so different. There's commonalities in children, but all kids are different and need different approaches. So thank you for sharing that approach. That is novel for me and my family.
Yeah. And I love what your family does. That's a really great idea. We also have a written calendar, and I do put my trips on it, but I've never pointed it out to my kids. Like right now, I think we're like 15 days away from a trip that we're all going on together, because I'm speaking in Southern Florida on President's Day. And it just so happens that the Friday before President's Day is a school holiday. So my kindergartner is not in school. And so I had said to my husband, do we want to go to Tampa or Orlando? Like we're going to be so close, and that's a 4-day weekend. So maybe we all just go. And so we decided, okay, that's one that we're going to do as a family, and we'll hang out on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then on Monday, I'll do the event while they do something at the hotel or a park, and then we'll all go home together. And so the only time my kids really care about the written calendar is when they're counting down to a trip they're going on. So right now, it's like we looked at it this morning and we're 15 days away. And so they're excited that 15 days from now, we all get to go to Florida. But I love the idea of showing them where mommy's trips are and what those mean, and having them, count backwards. So I may try to incorporate that. Thank you for the tip.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let me know how it goes and if that works for you. It's just, again, all kids need different things, right? And families operate differently. So I love sharing as many options or opportunities that work, right, for us to try as working moms. So let's talk about that related to FaceTime. Do you FaceTime every day that you're traveling? How long do you FaceTime? What time of the day do you try and FaceTime? What does that look like for you?
I FaceTime almost every day. I think there's maybe been like 2 days in my kid's life that I was away and didn't FaceTime. And that was either because they were with grandma and she couldn't FaceTime, but we could talk on the phone, or because my husband had said like, it's not the right time. It's going to upset them now instead of have them be excited. So almost every day. And if I'm gone for 2 or 3 days, it's definitely multiple FaceTiming. The other thing that works really well for us is we have Alexa Echo devices throughout the house. So my 6-year-old can, and very often does, call me from Alexa devices. So I will, be able to like FaceTime, but not be able to like video chat with them when they call me. So sometimes it's like my older one is calling me like 7 times in a day, which is fine if it's a travel day and I'm, in airports and hotels or whatever. Not always so great if I'm not. There was a period of time when he was like 4.5 that my husband would unplug the devices during certain things where, like I couldn't put my phone in do not disturb mode and needed him not to like call me a bunch of times, because when it comes up in my phone, it's my husband's name. So like there was one time I was actually on stage and I was like, I've missed 11 calls from my husband. Something must be like terribly wrong. But it was just, my then 4.5-year-old who was unsupervised for a few minutes calling me again and again and again and again and again from his room. So typically we will FaceTime every single day. I'll usually call and talk to them on the drive to school in the morning so they can just hear me and, talk about the day. And I'll tell them that, I'm about to go on stage and there's going to be 700 people there and everybody works for a car wash or, like whatever it is. And then they'll talk to me about their days, what's going to happen and what's exciting. And then we'll usually FaceTime either after school or right before bed.
That's great. I love hearing that. And it's also kind of same but different for us. I love to try and call when they're on their way to school. I think that's one of the best times, great, because they're kind of enclosed in the car and it's a really good time to chat with them. But I have not always called my kids. I started out trying to do that. And when my kids were younger, it happened with both of them, actually. When they were much younger, both of them when they were kind of like under 2, and only now the 3-year-old is getting better at it, they would kind of break down. Like they just didn't understand that I was not, like they can see me, but they couldn't get to me. And so we went for probably a good almost 9 months where I was not calling them over FaceTime and sometimes not doing the voice call. Based on like my husband, we would just text back and forth and say, you think this is going to be good for me to call? Is it not going to be good for me to call? And just make an audible about whether or not I should talk to my children. It was kind of hard on me, but I think it was much better for them because it was really caused stress.
Well, and I love that. And I know you said before, every kid is different. And I think also as parents know, like every kid is different at different times. Like it's not just that some children are different from other children. It's like what's right for your kid on Tuesday may not be what's right for your kid on Wednesday or even Tuesday night. And a lot of times when my husband travels, he won't FaceTime them for that exact same reason. Like it, for whatever reason with my kids, sometimes seeing dad tends to like bum them out or make them miss him more than seeing me. And I don't know if it's just because they're like used to me being gone, because I travel way more than my husband does. He travels maybe like once a quarter and I travel, sometimes, like I said, 7-8 times a month, usually like 5 times a month is kind of the average. But yeah, kids are so different.
They really are. It's fascinating, honestly. Sometimes frustrating, but also fascinating. The switching gears a little bit before we go, I definitely want to talk to you about time and energy management and how you figure out where to spend the hours, the limited hours that we have each day. Because when you're traveling and you travel so frequently that this, I think in some ways exponential, it eats up a lot of your time and energy, right? It takes a certain amount of time to get to the airport. You have to be to the airport in advance. Then you're taking the flight, then you're coming back, doing that same thing. And then there's the recovery just from all the travel that happens, right? It can kind of, at least it wears me down a little bit. But you are managing to run your company, speak on a regular basis, and you also wrote a book. So how did you carve out all the time to do that while still being the mom you wanted to be?
I did this course like 2 years ago that Marie Forleo offers. It's called Time Genius. And the idea is how to shift your relationship with time. And several friends had recommended it. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll check it out. And honestly, like, I'm like a time genius, time dropout. Like I did not finish the course. I did most of it. And one of the things that Marie talked about early on, and I'm sure it's fantastic. I just like have ADHD and, a lot going on. But one of the things that she said early on is that she had an epiphany one day where she was like, I don't do overwhelm. And she just decided from now on, I'm not going to be overwhelmed because being overwhelmed is not a productive use of time. All it does is like distract you and make you less productive in the moment. So when she would find herself feeling overwhelmed, she would say, I don't do overwhelm, and redirect her focus to whatever it was that needed to be done. My sort of interpretation of that is I don't do guilt, because feeling guilty serves no one, especially not me. And so I'm going to make the choices that I make. I'm going to do the best that I can. And when I'm with my kids, I'm going to be with my kids. And when I'm working, I'm going to be working. And like, that's that. And so this idea of like, of course, I am just like every other mom, I think, on the planet, like those things start to creep in and you feel that doubt of like, am I doing this wrong? Am I doing this wrong? I mean, I missed both my kids' birthdays last year. Like I felt like the worst mom in the world. And when I agreed to do both those events, we thought that we were all going to travel together as a family. And then for different reasons in May and September, it like didn't work out. And I felt awful until I reminded myself, like, I'm not going to let myself feel awful. I'm going to just make them have the best birthday celebration ever when I get back. And that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to look back and be like, oh, mom wasn't here on the day of my birthday. They're going to look back and remember that it was like the most epic, fun weekend ever when we celebrated them. And so I just try to remind myself that like feeling guilty or second guessing if I should be doing something else in that moment is really doing a disservice to my kids and my career. So I need to just like try to be in it and be confident in the decisions that I made in that moment. And then just like kick ass as a mom when I'm home and like just kill it in my career when I'm away.
I love that. So releasing the guilt, this idea of guilt, not letting it into your life, it really helps you to focus and be present and deliver on what's at hand, whether that's being the mom, writing the book, giving the amazing presentation. You're just there in the moment doing that thing, and it lets you do it well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, before we go, I want to ask you one very last question, which is, how do you define success?
I love this question. I define success as having the freedom to choose. Like there have definitely been times in my career and in my life where I felt like I had to do something. I had to say yes to a project I didn't want to do. I had to say yes to a trip I didn't want to go on because I needed the money. There have been times where, my heart was not in something and I did have that guilt creep in and I didn't want to do it and I just felt like I had to do it. Success is having the freedom to not have to say yes to something you don't want to say yes to.
That is a strong definition. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on The Savvy Working Mom.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Whitney. I really enjoyed our conversation.
If people want to know more about you or creating superfans, where can they find you?
You can find me at brittanyhodak.com. And if you want to check out my book, Creating Superfans, obviously there's more information about it there, but you can also pick it up everywhere books are sold, including in an Audible version that I narrate.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Savvy Working Mom podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen in. Also, make sure to link up with us at thesavvyworkingmom.com and on Instagram at thesavvyworkingmom. And please just share this podcast with any other mama who you think might enjoy or benefit from it. Until next time, remember, with intentional and daily action, you can live your best days now and forever.